Hello again, everybody. Welcome to Matt and Cheryl's Gen Excellent playlist. I'm Matt.
I'm Sheryl.
And today we inaugurate a new year in our survey of Gen X musical taste. 1984, a landmark year in pop music. I think it goes without saying. Just 5 years previous, music industry was kind of in the dumps, but the emergence of MTV, among other things, big shot in the arm for the music business. In 1984 was just a huge year in popular music.
Yeah, especially for like the mega stars.
A couple of megastars became megastars in 1984. Prince and Madonna,
Yeah.
specifically. Of course, Michael Jackson continued to dominate with the Thriller album, which was actually released at the end of 1982, but was the top seller in 83 and 84,
Yes.
continuing
That's
to dominate the
crazy.
charts as more than half the songs were released as successful singles. Bruce Springsteen, pretty well-established act, but he wasn't a megastar
Yeah.
until 1984 when the Born in the USA album came out.
Suddenly he is a mega star. And then you have like Tina Turner doing the same sort of thing
Yes.
where you've got these comebacks from artists that have been around for a long time. And they might have a few hits that were big, like Tina did with, back with Ike. But then suddenly they're right up there with the biggest stars of the era. And they're old,
Yeah, she'd been a has-been for years.
Yeah.
Yesterday's News, never a huge star, but had her moments in the 60s and probably best known for the cover of Proud Mary, which in this period of time would have been looked at with nostalgia and kind of kish value, not really appreciated. I think people appreciate that more now, but at this point in time, a lot of the 70s styles were considered very passé.
Yeah.
It would be several years before 70s stuff would come back into fashion.
She was more like an oldies act at this point,
Right. Huge left field hit. And again, MTV, a major player in that success. One of the things we're thinking about as we go into 1984, of course, is George Orwell's novel, I think was on a lot of people's minds when the calendar turned over.
Yeah.
So I was curious about songs and albums that have Orwellian themes. Of course, Bowie,
yes,
with the song 1984. And actually the whole album Diamond Dogs, which came out in 74, I think he initially wanted that to be a 1984 musical, but he got resistance from the estate of George Orwell and had to pivot a little bit. But there's certainly a lot of paranoia themes on that record. One of my favorite bands is Spirit. Their song 1984, not one of my favorite songs, but it's one of the few great live performance clips you can find of the band at its prime playing on the German music program Beat Club in 69 or 70, I think. 1984, Knocking at Your Door. Will you let it come? Will you let it run your life? I guess the answer is yes. I think we've all accepted the fact that we've got little tracking and recording devices on our person wherever we go now.
Yeah. It's pretty noticeable when you all of a sudden have this item come up on Amazon that you were talking about earlier, and you're like, why is this being advertised to me right now? In 1984, there was a movie of the book, and the Eurythmics did the soundtrack. They had a song, Sex Crime 1984, that was a hit in the UK from that soundtrack.
Hum that one for me.
Do, 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 do,
oh, okay.
Do, do, do. Sex Crime 1984.
I don't remember that song at all. I remember the movie, and I remember they had a soundtrack, but the music didn't stick.
I think that single was just released separately, like as a standalone single. There's a lot of things I'm sure that you could connect to that theme that I don't know if they're specifically of the book.
If only there were an album called 1984 that we could discuss today. Wouldn't that be great? Oh, wait a minute.
That would be so cool. Yeah.
But it really has nothing to do with George Orwell. It
has more to do with the year 1984, I suppose, right?
Correct.
The fact that that's when the album was released.
Van Halen's 1984, the first major release of the year, as well it should be. The lead single actually came out the month before in December of 83. That was Jump. And this was their jump into the big leagues. I mean, they were a huge popular touring rock band. They'd sold a lot of albums. They had a few top 40 singles, but nothing troubling the top 10 really. But this is the one that made them mega pop stars. Again, MTV, big reason why here. But they were really on the verge of breaking through. This is their 6th record, and they'd had success from the get-go once they became a recording act, that is. It took them a while to get that contract and get that first album out. They were pretty big on the Southern California scene for a while, coming out of Pasadena. And we've already discussed Van Halen a little bit. We had your husband Mike picked their first album for his album of the year, 1978. I selected, somewhat controversially, I guess, their cover of Dancing in the Streets for one of my songs for 1982. That's off their preceding album, Diver Down. There was a gap here between Diver Down and 1984, longest gap they'd had, recording gap, and just kind of an interesting run up to the release of this record. And you go back to just summarizing the previous record, Diver Down, kind of a rush job. They had intended on releasing a single after their tour for the Fair Warning album, just to kind of keep them in the public eye. And the single was more than a moderate hit. It was their cover of Roy Orbison's Oh Pretty Woman. And the record company immediately says, no, we got to get you guys in the studio. We got to get another album out. This single's hot. We got to capitalize on it. They planned on taking some time off, so they get rushed to the studio. The Diver Down album is a rush job. It's half covers. And I don't think anybody was particularly thrilled with the record. I think the end result was certainly worthy and a better album, I think, than people give it credit for, just because of the talent on hand.
Yeah. I think the fact that there's so many covers and it just does feel like a rush job in that way.
Yeah, Eddie in particular was very unsatisfied with the experience, and particularly the Dancing in the Streets song. He was upset because he'd come up with this really cool synth riff that he wanted to use, but it got kind of snatched away from him and patched into this cover of Dancing in the Streets, which I think the song works. It's their funkiest. I like it a lot, but Eddie was pretty pissed off about it. I call him Eddie. One of the things I've discovered in researching Van Halen, he did not like being called Eddie. It was either Edward or Ed. It was never Eddie. Most people call him Eddie Van Halen, most fans, but it's Ed or Edward. He hated being called Eddie.
Eddie sounds so juvenile. You know, it really does sound like a little kid name.
But wasn't their whole thing kind of juvenile?
Yeah, and Eddie is like a big kid. I mean, that's how he comes across to me, is just like he's just a big kid.
Well, his response to the disappointing experience of the Diver Down album, and they eventually toured that, he felt like they were getting pulled too far in this commercial direction. Now, you go to the two albums that came out before Diver Down, and we talked about this previously, Women and Children First, Fair Warning. After the first two popular albums, Van Halen self-titled and 2, it was a little heavier, darker sound. And a lot of the hardcore Van Halen fans, this is their best stuff, those two records. Diver Down, the pendulum is swinging back the other way. So you have these two camps developing in Van Halen. You've got David Lee Roth, who's kind of formed a partnership with the producer, who's also a label big shot at Warner Brothers, Ted Templeman. And they're trying to push the band in a more commercial direction. They want to sell more product. They want to have hit singles. They want to break through to a bigger audience. Then you've got the artist, Edward Van Halen, or Ed, who wants to experiment more, who's an incredibly gifted musician and wants to push the boundaries a little bit more. So you've got this push and pull going on. So Diver Down ends up being more of a Roth Templeman album. And Ed decides that he wants to work away from the glare of the record company and the suits and Ted Templeman in particular, and David Lee Roth, and builds his own home studio, which he calls 5150, which would later be the title of their first post-David Lee Roth album. 5150 from police jargon, which signifies a mental patient on the loose, potentially dangerous, which is kind of clever. Yeah. So he builds his own studio, and then he's formed this really tight bond with the engineer, Don Landy. So they set to work on getting material together for the next record, and they're generally working alone in his home studio. I think Roth pops in occasionally. Now, if you know the history of Van Halen, like a lot of groups, they split the credit amongst the entire band, four-piece band. Ed, the guitar player, the bass player is Michael Anthony, David Lee Roth, lead singer, and Ed's brother, Alex, the drummer. But Ed is the composer. He writes all the music.
Yeah.
David Lee Roth generally writes the lyrics, and Ed writes the music. The lead track, Jump, was a keyboard riff that he'd had banging around for a while, and he tried to get the band to do something with it previously, but got a lot of resistance, particularly from David Lee Roth. And again, Ted Templeman and Roth tended to see eye to eye on things. Roth's whole angle, even though he wants big time success, he wants to be a huge star, he wants to break through to a big audience, but he feels like the band's identity is just so wrapped into Ed Van Halen as this guitar hero. You don't want to hear keyboards. So there have been keyboards on previous Van Halen tracks, but they're hard to pick out as keyboards. They use keyboards on Women and Children first, but they're treated and distorted in such a way that it's hard to make out that it's actually a Wurlitzer piano and not a treated guitar you're hearing. The riff on Dancing in the Streets, hard to make out exactly what that is. Is that a keyboard? Is that a sequence bit of synthesizer? Or is that something like just an effect on a guitar, like Pete Townsend in Going Mobile? You know, that you can make a guitar sound any number of ways.
Yeah.
You know, hard for the average listener to pick that out as a keyboard riff. There is no disputing there's a keyboard riff signaling the start of Jump. It's right in your face immediately.
Well, I mean, it starts with 1984, the song 1984. Right. And it's, you know, and that could be, okay, this is a weird spacey way to start this album. But then it goes right into the Jump riff. And yeah, there's no denying. And it's not just that it's a keyboard. I mean, Sunday Afternoon in the Park from Fair Warning is a full on keyboard sound, but it's dark. It's got a heaviness to it that feels more rock and metal. And this, I mean, Ed says that he was partly influenced from Kiss on My List, Hall & Oates. So, you know, we're definitely going a much lighter route with this one, and it's definitely a pop sound.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he'd had that for a while. He had that before the Diver Down album came out, and the band didn't want to use it. So this is something that had been sitting around. Also in the interim period between Diver Down and the release of 1984, they played the US Festival in Southern California, the second US Festival put on by Apple's Steve Wozniak. Huge bill.
For $1.5 million.
Right. They got offered $1.5 million to play one set at the US Festival, which was a record at the time. And they wanted to make sure that they had the record. David Bowie got offered the same amount of money, but he played a longer set. So they got paid more per minute than David Bowie did.
And actually, I read a funny thing about this, too, that the Clash, apparently they got paid $500,000. And they were on stage, you know, talking about how this isn't about money or whatever. And on the screen behind them, they flashed a photo of the check that was written out to them for $500,000.
I go back in my memory to early 1984. I would have been 14, still listening to Top 40 radio. I don't think I was even aware of the US Festival. Were you?
No.
When it happened?
Uh-uh.
Then this was the second one. They did one in 82, I think.
Yeah.
Late 82.
Mm-hmm.
But incredible list of talent. And then they had like a new wave day and a heavy metal day. So obviously Van Halen played on the heavy metal day.
Which was the most popular day.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So they play this show. David Lee Roth is drunk, but he's just doing his thing. If you look it up on YouTube, these videos have obviously been heavily edited. They do not sync up with the vocals often. But, you know, Van Halen usually delivered live. They were a great live act, no question about it. And David Lee Roth was an incredibly charismatic frontman, despite his vocal limitations. Again, we've discussed this in depth when we talked about Dancing in the Street. He's, you know, certainly no great shakes as a vocal talent, but what he does with his voice and his charisma and his ability to command a stage made him invaluable in the group. And so a lot of the pre-production work has taken place with just Ed and Don Landy, the engineer, late nights in the home studio. And they finally get the track together for Jump, and Templeman turns around. He realizes this is a potential big hit. And it was. It was their first number one record, released at the end of 83, carrying over into 1984. Actually, top of the charts here in January, yes, with Owner of a Lonely Heart. And Van Halen's they're a little late to the game, bringing keyboards to the table. And, you know, listening to this album, I can't help but think of Rush.
I know. It's very similar to what Rush was doing at this time. And also getting the same backlash that Van Halen was getting. You have one of the best guitarists in the world in your band, and why so many keyboards? I mean, even
Yeah.
Alex Lifeson was feeling that way about what Rush was doing in 1984.
But Rush a few years ahead of Van Halen in this, starting with Moving Pictures.
Right. They'd already been using keyboards for
actually
a while.
Starting with Permanent Waves, I think, when they really started using keyboards significantly. And that's a 1980 release. You got to think that Eddie was being influenced by Rush, but there seems to have been some tension between those two camps. I think he was reluctant to admit that there was any influence there, but it's there. If you listen, it's certainly there. But you would think we would have Jump on our list. I guess for me, it suffers from overexposure, I think. I've just heard it way too many times. But one thing that still stays fresh for me is the solo section.
Yeah.
And this is where I hear a lot of Rush. I mean, they're doing a lot of interesting things with the rhythm in the breakdown there. Although it technically stays in a 4/4 rhythm, Alex is kind of moving the beat around. So it sounds like they're slipping into different time signatures during the solo. But they're actually maintaining a 4/4 beat throughout, which I think is an interesting little trick. And of course, every Ed Van Halen guitar solo is just a piece of art. I mean, it's incredible. For a song that is really pretty accessible and poppy, it's a pretty ripping solo.
Yeah, and that's the thing too about this song and the other ones that have synths on them in this album is that you still get Eddie Van Halen's guitar solos, and that is undeniably rock and undeniably Van Halen. So, I feel like it's a little overblown how big of a deal the synthesizers were on this album, because it's really only a few songs that have synths. It's not like they totally took out Eddie's guitar, and it's just not even there or anything. It's still the focal point. I think maybe the bigger part of it is that it's more pop oriented.
So it's interesting to me, not being a Van Halen head at this time, not being a heavy metal hard rock guy at all. It didn't burn me that they're doing this. I mean, it didn't affect me one way or the other. I thought it was a cool sound. And we're still in the era of great synth sounds too, warm synth sounds. We haven't gotten to the really ugly stuff yet. It's coming soon, fast, folks. But they're using the older, really cool sounding analog synths here, like Yamahas and Oberheims. But that riff, the cliche for guitarists and people who work in guitar stores, is like everybody wants to come in and play Smoke on the Water when they test the guitar.
Or Stairway to Heaven.
This song made it a cliche to go in and mess around with synthesizers in the music store and play the Jump riff. Everybody was doing that.
Well, I think the thing about it too is it's a riff. It is a riff, and so it's super catchy and it really does stick in your head, and it makes this song much more accessible because of that. And it's simple. Like anybody could walk into a Guitar Center and play that riff. I could probably play it, and I don't play keyboards. So
yeah, it doesn't take that long to figure out. But, a lot of Van Halen fans had to be kind of pulling their hair out, though. This is the first inkling of this new record. It's like, what is this?
Especially because these are the first two songs. The first song is all synths, the second song is Jump. It's like, what's happening?
Well, they would have their fears calmed quickly after Jump fades out and Panama comes in, which is just, for me, the prototypical Van Halen song. And that's my selection for the playlist, Panama. It's the second single. And honestly, I have very few quibbles about this record. It's a really good record. But I would have flip-flopped Jump and Panama. I mean, I understand why they did it, because Jump is very keyboard heavy, and 1984 is an atmospheric keyboard instrumental. But I think it would have worked better seeking into Panama, where you're kind of like, oh, this is interesting, what Van Halen's going on, and then boom, the Panama riff kicks in, and then Jump after that. I might be in the minority here, but I would have sequenced that differently. I would have gone 1984 Panama, then Jump.
It might have made the fans happier because then they wouldn't have maybe been so concerned about keyboards taking over this album. Yeah, Panama just kind of seems like the ultimate Van Halen song.
Yeah.
I mean, even like it's got that part in the middle where Dave's like, ease the seat back, and it's so Dave.
And the revving sound.
Yeah.
That's actually Eddie Van Halen's
Lamborghini. Yeah. Yep. And I mean, the video for this and Jump, They're both just like concert type videos, but they have the antics in Panama. They put in all the weird crap that David Lee Roth's wanted actually in Jump, but they didn't let him put it in that video. And Michael Anthony with his Jack Daniels bass, and it just feels like so Van Halen.
Panama is a killer track, and really the first side is just relentless start to finish. Top Jimmy, which is a reference to a kind of bar band that David Lee Roth became friendly with in the LA area, and then Drop Dead Legs. For me, the call on the track to pick from this album, it was between Panama and Hot for Teacher. Hot for Teacher leads off side 2. Of course, the video very memorable with the little kids stylized like the members of the band. Beautifully done.
Yeah.
Lots of cheesecake.
I can tell you right now, I've never seen a female PE teacher that looks like that, especially a PE teacher.
I would sure remember if I had. But this is one of the most scorching things they ever laid down to wax. Absolutely relentless pummeling beat to this. And what a cool start to this. I mean, you can't really tell. All the drummers in the audience, when the first time they heard this, they're probably jaws hit the floor like, oh my God, what is he?
Yeah.
What is he doing?
And it's still a little debated what he is doing. Some people say he's using Simmons drums and overlaying them onto his actual kit, where he's playing double bass along with the toms, you know. When I listen to it closely, it does kind of sound like there's two sounds laid on top of each other like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if that is what's happening. When he plays it live, you know, it still sounds similar, but it doesn't sound exactly the same. And he's obviously not using the Simmons on stage. He's only using his acoustic kit.
I've read a couple of books about Van Halen, and you have to read multiple books to really get the full picture here. So there's a lot of he said, she said, a lot of contrary testimony.
Yes.
But one of the theories is that, again, it's one of Ed's cars, and it's like the burbling exhaust that you're hearing at the beginning of that. And then the kick drum comes in, the double kick, and he's trying to mimic the burbling exhaust sound. So for a minute, you've got them both overlaid on one another.
I don't think it really does have the exhaust, but
right,
I think they were trying to emulate that. I do believe the theory about the Simmons being, you know, added on top of it.
It's funny too. I've been reading a little about the Police recently, and I don't think the guys in the band ever admitted to it, but there very well could have been some overdubbing here. And Stuart Copeland took delight when the Police had their big hit, Message in a Bottle, their breakthrough. There was a number one hit in England for weeks. But he said a lot of the drummers out there didn't realize that I'd done a bunch of overdubbing on the drum track, and he just took delight in seeing all these amateur drummers trying to mimic his parts as they cover the song, which was impossible to do. You know, Stuart Copeland, obviously very talented drummer, but yeah, there are plenty of tricks in the trade. They don't always tell you about it.
But people can play this part, this Hot for Teacher intro, and still it will sound like it, because all it's really doing is just enhancing it a little more. And it's also kind of making it just a little bit off kilter, you know, like, and more intense to put the Simmons overdub on it. But even without that, it's really cool. And it's very reminiscent of Billy Cobham. Greg Bissonette, who plays with David Lee Roth later and like tours and does this song, there's a whole tutorial video about him playing it. And he's talking about how Billy Cobham and Gene Krupa, you know, the sing, 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 dun, 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 and that's the floor tom part is really taking from that. So apparently, you know, he kind of put those two together with the kick and the floor tom. And when I listened to it like that, I was like, oh yeah, actually this is pretty cool, because once he comes in with the cymbals, it does kind of have a little bit more of a jazzy feel to it, you know, and I can see where that's coming from.
What's your take on Alex Van Halen? There seems to be a lot of debate about, you know, how great a drummer is he really? He tends to be a little underrated, I think.
I think so too, but I think he's very under the radar. I don't see very much at all with him talking about himself.
He's got the newest Van Halen book, Brothers, and, you know, it's very touching. Obviously, he's very hurt by the loss of his brother. They were extremely close. I won't go too deep into the backstory because, again, we've talked about Van Halen previously, but, you know, they grew up very poor immigrants from Holland, biracial, which I think a lot of Van Halen fans at the time did not know. Their mother's Indonesian. And they dealt with a lot of issues because of that as youths. They didn't know the language when they moved. So obviously, a really tight bond between the two. The book was a bit disappointing. It's like he doesn't remember anything. I don't know if it's all the booze, but half the book seems like him citing other people's books. It's because he can't remember things himself.
That's why it's weird. He's kind of a non-entity to me. Like, he doesn't really stand out as a personality in any way, where, Dave obviously does. Eddie does.
And Dave's book is a riot. It is so fun to read.
I bet. Yeah.
Yeah. And him being kind of a control freak, obviously he had a heavy hand in the editing of this book. And it basically comes off like him just sat in a room, somebody flipped on a mic and said, Dave, go.
Yeah.
And it's just his personality all over, just wildly all over the place. It's a perfect editorial decision because it's his personality right there on the page.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And
yeah.
I mean, as far as Alex, going back to Alex as a drummer, he's super solid. He's got chops for sure, but it's kind of like Ringo. Like, he's overpowered by Eddie,
comparison.
And by David Lee Roth's personality. But if you took him out of the mix, it would be very noticeable, and they wouldn't be the same. So in that way, I would say, yes, he's a great drummer, just like I think Ringo is an amazing drummer.
Yep.
And a lot of it is because of that factor.
Just like Ringo is the perfect drummer for the Beatles, Alex Van Halen's the perfect drummer for Van Halen. But Hot for Teacher, this is what separates the wheat from the chaff. This is why you can't lump Van Halen in with all of these glam metal bands that are starting to come out that came out of the same scene they did, the Sunset Strip scene. They are leagues ahead of these guys musically. They're way more sophisticated. They're drawing on a broader array of sources. And a lot of that has to do with Dave. And Ed Van Halen's kind of in a class of his own as, not only a guitar shredder, but the depth of his feel and his musical knowledge, which, came from his father being a jazz musician. A lot of natural talent, but a lot of work too. I mean, he was basically glued to his guitar his whole life, constantly practicing, noodling. But Hot for Teacher just blazes. I mean, just a scorching track. And very few of the other glam metal bands coming out of LA could pull that off.
You know what really stood out to me listening to this more, and I never noticed that much before? It really sounds like ZZ Top. That bluesy riff,
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, that riff certainly on Hot for Teacher. Then you get I'll Wait, which, again, a very keyboard heavy track. And everybody was so worried about keyboards tainting Van Halen. It's really only the 2 songs on this record.
Yeah, I know. Well, 3 if you count 1984, but yes.
I don't.
But yeah, I know. And I'll Wait, to me, that has that darker sound to it that they were using in like Fair Warning. And, the keyboards in that don't have the same effect as they do in Jump. It's, it's more just like a background dark riff.
Interesting to me as well. I don't think I realized this till recently that Michael McDonald was a co-composer on that track.
I know. That was so shocking. I was like, whoa. And he didn't get any credit for it either. He was an uncredited co-composer. I'm surprised that Dave even was open to that in the first place, but I could see how his name was not attached to it, because what a strange combination.
Yeah, that was actually I'll Wait was the second single. I don't know if I said Panama was the second single before. That's not true. It was the third. Yeah. I'll Wait was the second. And I'll Wait was rushed out because Jump was such a mega hit. They figured, well, we get another keyboard track out there.
Right.
So they didn't even have a video. No video was made for I'll Wait. The last track I want to talk about is Girl Gone Bad. And here's where the Rush influence is most apparent, I think, where they show, we can do what you guys do. We just choose not to. the intro to that song, very tricky, very Rush sounding.
Those cool harmonics, and the intro is very cool. It is definitely totally Rush.
My other minor quibble with this record, the last track, House of Pain, solid track. Again, they've been laying around. I think it dated back to their demo tape before album number 1.
Yeah.
But it just kind of fades out kind of abruptly. It's there and it's gone in 3 minutes and 19. It's a very short record. It's only 33 minutes long. I think they could have done a little more with that track. But outside of those 2 minor quibbles, this is a great record. This is probably their best album.
Pretty much every song is good, and some are great.
Yeah. All 6 of the Roth era albums are worthy.
Yeah.
But it's a tough call on which is the best.
This or the first one. I
Yeah.
mean, their debut really is probably the best. But I think this one, it brings in all the different facets of Van Halen together, you know, in one place. And they're all doing the things that they do best on this album. Like Dave, you know, in Hot for Teacher, I don't feel tardy, you know, like stuff like little bits
Yeah.
and pieces like that that they throw in that are more just their personalities.
The sad ending to this is the personalities finally got the best of one another. And again, multiple viewpoints on what caused the split between Roth and the rest of the band. Did he leap? Was he pushed? Uh, what it seems to me like is the main divisive factor was Roth really wanted to get into movies and he wanted the band to be a part of it and provide the soundtrack. Well, Ed didn't want to be the backup band for a David Lee Roth starring vehicle. That was definitely not in the cards. And whether he left of his own accord or was pushed out of the band, that's up for debate. But it would be over after this. And in my mind, Van Halen was over. You know, again, I wasn't a big Van Halen guy before this record. I never owned this album until recently, although I heard all these songs, heard it at other people's houses, other people's cars, whatever. Seen the videos a million times on MTV. Always liked all the singles. But to me, no David Lee Roth, no Van Halen, which is counterintuitive because the band is named after the two brothers.
Yeah.
But it just wasn't the same. And now I'm ready to have my mind changed because in a couple of years, the 5150 album with Sammy Hagar and lead vocals comes out. It's a big seller, but I never dug any of the singles. I never bothered listening to the record. I will give it a shot.
I was actually a fan of 5150 when it came out, and I listened to it a lot, and I like it, but that's the only one. Beyond that, I didn't really pay any attention. And I always liked
not that
Sammy
I hated
Hagar.
Sammy Hagar.
Yeah, I like Sammy, but it's not the same. To me, it kind of feels like what happened to them is sort of similar to what happened with the Tubes and Fee Waybill, wanting to go out and be like, you know, the star, be in Hollywood, have this personality that just doesn't really mesh necessarily with a band setting. And sort of the same thing happened with Dave too when he left or whatever, when they split. He really didn't have much of a career after that, you know.
Which is sad to me because the guy was gifted. I mean, he wanted to be this all-around entertainer. He's very smart, very charismatic, but he couldn't stay out of his own way. I think he just wore people out with his hyperactive personality.
And he had those hits with like Just a Gigolo, and then he did California Girls. Like he was doing covers and weird, you know, sort of like kitschy things. And it really, I just think it was hard for anyone to take him seriously. Yeah, they were fun. They were more like novelty hits. And then with the videos, you know, because like he wanted that aspect of it too.
Well, and then he put this killer band together with Vi and Billy Sheehan and Greg Bissonette. I mean, these are some of the hottest guys on their instruments, but it just never...
But the music wasn't there, and Eddie wrote the music, you know? I mean, that's what's lacking here. Dave doesn't have enough substance on his own to carry it, you know, carry a band unless he's doing a Vegas act, you know, or something like that just wasn't going to work.
But again, I am open to having my mind changed as we go along on this project. We'll cross those bridges when we come to them with the Hagar Van Halen albums and Roth solo stuff. But for me, that was it. When he left the band, it just wasn't the same. It
wasn't. It was Van Hagar.
Yeah.
So if you see it as a separate band, I feel like it's easier to take it in.
So 1984, obviously huge hit. Several hit singles off that record, videos all over MTV. The other song we're going to talk about today, not a big hit in the United States. And this band would never have a big hit in the U.S. Their biggest hit was still a couple of years away, but generally considered to be outside of the peak years of the group. And we're talking about Echo and the Bunnymen, which released their fourth record in 1984, Ocean Rain. But several months before the album comes out, in the month of January, they released the lead single, which is really, I think, the pinnacle of their singles, which are generally consistently great throughout this period. But The Killing Moon, I think most people would agree, was the cream of the crop.
Yeah, especially Ian McCulloch. He would say that it was the best song ever written.
Never been shy about that.
He's not that wrong, really. And, you know, we've talked a lot about Echo and the Bunnymen, too, because I chose the Cutter from their album Porcupine for last year.
That made both of our preliminary lists,
Yeah.
as well as The Killing Moon making our preliminary list for 84.
Right.
Both of them.
Echo and the Bunnymen came from Liverpool, which I've been watching the new Beatle anthology that just came out on Disney. They just released it on Disney and have a new episode of it. And it's like, Liverpool was amazing. I mean, it's just the amount of bands that came out of Liverpool in the 60s and in the 80s. And they're part of that second wave. Icicle Works, which I'm going to choose one of their songs for the playlist too. Flock of Seagulls, China Crisis, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, OMD. I mean, those are huge bands and they all come from Liverpool. Echo and the Bunnymen, Ian McCulloch, who's the lead singer, he is a personality that is very difficult.
I think one of the things we talked about when we did the cutter regarding Ian McCulloch, he's not cut out to do anything else. He is doing exactly what he was meant to do on this earth. He is meant to be the front man of a rock and roll band.
Yes.
I mean, his personality is entirely committed to that.
And, Echo and the Bunnymen, they are a band. So, yeah, Ian's an amazing frontman, but Will Sargent, incredible guitarist, and does some really, really interesting, cool stuff, especially on The Killing Moon.
One of the great stylists on guitar, not technically proficient. I mean, he is at the complete other end of the spectrum from Ed Van Halen. Not a guy who can wow you with his technical ability, but just consistently gets interesting sounds out of his instrument.
Yeah, it creates a mood and atmosphere, and it's unique too. And, it's something that is distinct. Les Pattison on bass, also a great player.
Just solid, yeah.
And Pete DeFreitas on drums, really
powerhouse.
Excellent drummer, great sound, strong drummer.
A machine, absolute machine.
Which luckily they got rid of Echo, which was their drum machine initially, and they brought Pete in. But yeah, I think the thing about Will Sargent too, his sound, he uses like a ton of reverb and delay, and it really does add to that feel of the song, where The Killing Moon is a great example of that. It just evokes emotion.
That's the first sound you hear on the intro. It just yanks you in, and he's using kind of an unusual instrument. It's a Vox Teardrop Mark 12. It's like a 12-string. Generally, when you're hearing 12-string electric guitar in popular music, it's a Rickenbacker, like the Byrds and REM and whatnot.
Yeah.
This is a little different sound, and I guess to get that really trebly sound, they didn't mic an amp. I think they plugged directly into the console with it, and that just put some effects on it.
Yeah, it's a very unique, interesting sound. And it's actually even unique for Will, because he says on the intro, he was actually just like warming up and they were recording him and he didn't realize it. And they stuck it on the beginning, that little, part that starts the song. And he was like, and I've been trying to figure out what I played ever since, like to recreate it on stage or, because it wasn't really intentional. But it is really cool though, because it does kind of set the tone for this song in a way that's sort of otherworldly, which also does make sense with the lyrics. It kind of has a dream-like feel to it. And apparently the lyrics to this came to Ian in a dream. He just woke up, in the middle of the night, and he had the lines, "Fate up against your will, through the thick and thin, you will wait until you give yourself to him." That just came to him, and it was like from God. And, you hear about people saying this song came from, I don't know where it came from. There's, I think Yesterday is one of the most famous.
The Satisfaction riff, Keith Richards woke up, recorded it, and went back to sleep and had no memory of doing it. So allegedly, the story goes.
Well, same with Yesterday. Paul woke up in the middle of the night and played the tune. And then the next day he was like, this has got to be a different song. I know someone wrote this and he wrote it. And Purple Haze, Jimmy says same thing, just came to him. So this is one of those songs that came from the heavens, apparently, at least the line, and which is really the coolest part of this song is that section. There's a lot going on here between Will Sargent's otherworldly guitar sound, Ian's vocals and lyrics, and most of this album, including the song, Pete DeFreitas is actually playing brushes, kind of keeps it more in that, ethereal, mellow place.
Right, because he's generally a heavy hitter.
Yeah, that also feels very dreamlike. There's something in this song that kind of has that, and I think that it was really brought to its peak in that way in the movie Donnie Darko. It was used at the beginning scene. And actually, Ian even talks about the movie saying, yeah, we gave him the song. It was like the director's first movie. They
And
just
this is
figured
years later.
years later, yeah, in the early 2000s, I think. And, they let him use the song. And then the movie became like a cult classic. But he's like, well, I think he actually just took the whole idea of this song and made the movie around this. I mean, there's a bunny, the bunny in the movie, Bunnymen, and he's like basically taking credit for the entire movie that was stolen from him. But that's just him. That's his personality.
They call him Mac the Mouth for a reason.
Right.
And would you not say second most iconic lips in rock and roll?
Oh my gosh. Lips like sugar. He's got just these voluptuous lips. Yeah. The other thing that Will Sargent says that he actually took the chords from this song from Space Oddity, David Bowie's Space Oddity, and used them backward. And that's, where the chord transition comes from. And it does have a spaciness about it. Killing Moon, the lyrics. And I guess Ian said that he was really into space when he was a kid. And he's kind of drawing from that. But I think this is also one of those songs too, where Ian had brought it to the band and they kind of were like, man, they really weren't interested in recording it initially. But when Pete, the drummer, came in using the brushes, that really changed the feel of the song. And I think that that's kind of what brought it to the right place. And this whole album, he's pretty much, I think, most of the album playing brushes.
It's got an unplugged feel to it.
Yeah.
Years before MTV Unplugged became a thing, this is almost like Echo and the Bunnymen Unplugged. And it's not the whole record. There's some rockin' parts to it as well.
Yeah.
But yes, it's a quieter, lusher production. They self-produced this record. They didn't work with a producer for the first time. But Gil Norton was instrumental in the recording. This would go on to be a notable producer of
the
Pixies and
yeah,
Foo Fighters, among others.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of his early things on his resume. He was the lead engineer on this. But the sound of it, you can hear influences. Talking Heads was a big influence on them. And Mac is such a great vocalist, and this song is just perfectly suited to his crooning style, I think. If you don't know Echo and the Bunnymen, and again, they weren't a big hit-making proposition in the United States. They were way more popular in England. But get the Songs to Learn and Sing comp. That is such a great compilation. It's their singles, some key B-sides, and one song that was new at the time of release. It was in a movie.
Bring on the Dancing Horses.
Bring on the Dancing Horses. But I find it interesting, too, that Max says the lyrics came from God. Well, the preceding single to this was a non-LP single called Never Stop, which came out in late 1983. It's kind of an anti-religious screed. And then comes the Killing Moon, where he says God sent the lyrics to him. So that's typical Ian McCulloch. It's just saying provocative things that sometimes can be contrary.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when this album came out, the pre-release statements, Ian was going along saying not only was The Killing Moon the best song ever written, but this is the greatest album ever made. So, critics and people were just kind of getting tired of his pompous attitude. And when the album initially came out, it did not get good reviews and it was kind of panned. I mean, they were using an orchestra. There's like a 35-piece orchestra on this album. They're using different sounds.
Yeah, exotic instruments, orchestrations, horns and strings, a lot of acoustic guitar.
Yeah, and the album before this, Porcupine, was a very dark album.
That's another great debate with Echo and the Bunnymen, too, is are they goth? I say yes, they are, but there are a lot of things.
Yeah.
I mean, not everything they do is goth, but there's certainly a strong gothic element to it. But there's a lot of humor in his lyrics, too.
I think they're goth like The Cure are goth.
Yeah.
Like they have that darkness to them. There is a feel there, but they could write a pop song.
Same with Susie and the Banshees. You can't just lump these bands into this one monolithic category, but there's certainly a strong element in each of them.
Which is why I think they're great bands, because they can cross over into those different territories and you can't pigeonhole them. And, all the guys in Echo and the Bunnymen are great musicians. Well, I mean, I don't know if I'd say great musicians, but what they do well. They do have a distinct sound. The other two singles on this album, Silver and
Seven
Seven
Seas.
Seas, are
Love them both.
totally pop. I mean, Seven
Yes.
Seas is really pop, and they're great songs too.
Love singing along with these.
Yeah. Well, songs to learn and sing.
Yes,
They really are.
There you go. There you
they,
go. I took it literally.
Yes,
I took
I
it
agree.
literally.
They are very sing-alongable.
Seven seas, swimming them so well.
Yeah, and he is when you say he's a bit of a crooner, it's true. He does have that crooniness to his vocals.
I think Will Sargent was the big Doors fan in the group. I think Ian kind of came around to the Doors late. I don't think that was a big influence on him initially, per se, but he kind of realized that he saw a lot of similarities with Jim Morrison as far as his vocals are concerned. They're kind of in the same lower range.
Yeah, in fact, one of the songs that did become more popular in the States was their cover of People Are Strange for the Lost Boys soundtrack. In this album, there's certainly parts where you can hear Jim Morrison.
Sure.
I mean, it's like, especially like
Thorn of Crowns.
Thorn of Crowns, yeah.
That's a song best experienced live, I think.
Mm-hmm.
The lyrics are kind of jarring for me on the record. The cauliflower, cabbage.
Yeah.
What the hell is he talking about? But live, this is a mesmerizing song. It's kind of like the end. The same kind of drama to it. They were such a great live band too. Really good live band.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and then this album, I think when I first started listening to it, I told you, Matt, I was like, I do not like this album.
I was surprised to hear that. It's my favorite. Yeah.
I mean, I love The Killing Moon. I love all the singles. Actually, they're all great songs. The rest of the album, I was like, no. But I actually felt the same way with Porcupine. I listened to it a lot for when we were doing 1983, and it actually became one of my favorite albums over time.
It takes a lot of time to get into that record. It eventually sinks its claws into you, but it is not accessible at all outside of the incredible 1-2 punch of the singles, which are really, I say Killing Moon is their best single. I mean, I don't know. It's not that easy. The Back of Love is incredible.
Yes.
The Cutter's incredible. All their singles are good. But the rest of Porcupine it's a tougher listen. It takes a while for that to really sink in.
It's very prickly. And
it's very good.
I felt the same with this album in a different way. This one, I felt like the singles are incredible, but the rest of it either had... One of the things that really threw me off about it is that the production on it, some songs are just a lot quieter, like in the actual mix, and his vocals are mixed way back, and it doesn't have a continuity throughout the album as far as like the way that the mix is and I thought it might have been the mix, but there's two different mixes. I listened to the more current one too, and I was like, no, I think they did that on purpose because it creates a mood. It's a very moody album, and once again, it's a slow burn. The more I listened to it, I was like, okay, it's starting to sink in. I'm starting to get it. And I think the other reason why it was tough too, and the Doors do this as well on their albums, the singles are very accessible. The album tracks are not. So you have to kind of like really allow yourself to give time to the rest of the album and allow it to unfold as you go along. Like you said with Thorn of Crowns, at first I was like, what is this freak out vocals? And this is just so, it just seemed like they were trying to be so artsy. But then when I really let it sink in and listen to it live, I was like, oh, this song is amazing. That guitar riff, the freaky guitar riff in between the verses, just like, it just grabs you, and it's so cool. So I am now think that this is their best album.
Yeah, I would agree. So of the great 4-album run from Crocodiles, Heaven Up Here, Porcupine, Ocean Rain, this is my favorite. And I still have not really dived into Heaven Up Here yet.
Neither have I.
But the other three are certainly worthy. And this one wins out. It's just a unique sounding record for this era.
Yeah.
With the unplugged style, the exotic instrumentation. Nocturnal Me. Wow, that's just a haunting.
Now that's goth.
Kind of
that
Middle
is
Eastern.
goth.
Oh yes, for sure. And then the closing track, Ocean Rain, just beautiful. Beautiful way to end the record.
Yeah, beautiful
Haunting.
orchestration.
Yeah.
And it just culminates in Ian's like glorious full voice at the end. And yeah. And I think retrospectively, people now look at this album and think it is one of the greatest. It is their greatest, but didn't have that effect initially. You know, I mean, I think it is definitely one of those that takes reassessment and time. And I'm glad I gave it the time because I really do think it's an incredible album. And you know, when you look at their album covers too of that 4 album run, they're on the cover, but you can't really see them. It's very murky.
All similar covers, all shot by the same guy, Brian Griffin.
Yeah, and they're all taken from like kind of far away. You know, the photos are
all out in kind of remote natural
nature
settings.
Yeah, like crocodiles are in like a forest. Heaven Up Here, they're on a beach. Porcupine, there's like this frozen waterfall in Iceland, and Ocean Rain, they're on a river. And it's kind of cool because I think it does sort of like bring those 4 albums together as a piece, you know, all of them. And then the next album, which didn't come out till 1987, it's just the 4 of them on the cover, and it's a completely different, you know, departure from what they've been doing, which the album itself is too. It's much more accessible, and they did have their biggest hit in America, Lips Like Sugar, from that album.
And it's the same band, but it's not. Although it's the same group, Echo and the Bunnymen. It's a much slicker sound, more tailored for American radio. I think they were really making a strong play, for acceptance in this country.
Mm-hmm.
Another interesting thing they did during this time period, and kind of taking it from the Police Handbook, is playing unusual shows in unusual locations and settings.
Right.
They weren't as big as the Police, but they were big enough that they're starting to play larger halls. But they did this interesting video where they performed, you know, unplugged in a little cafe in Liverpool.
Yeah.
They went up and played a tiny venue at the very tippy top of Scotland.
Right. They did a tour of like the islands around Scotland.
Yeah. They did a lot of interesting stuff like that. They kind of made a point of avoiding rock band cliches. They tried to be interesting, which I appreciate.
Yeah, and I think that helps their first 4 albums still be great albums now.
Yeah.
And they don't sound of the time. They have like a very kind of otherworldly sound to them that can't be pigeonholed, really. I think that it really benefited them just doing their own thing.
So 2 very different bands, very different songs, kicking off 1984 for us. Echo and the Bunnymen's The Killing Moon, the single released in the back half of January of 1984, and Van Halen's 1984 LP, which came out right after the new year. And the song I've chosen is Panama, which was the 3rd single release from the record following Jump. And wait, a lot of February activity in 1984 that we're going to jump into on our next broadcast, including one of those artists which would go on to become a megastar by the end of the year. We'll also talk about one of Sheryl and I's favorite old school bands that had a comeback hit album in 1983, and a great single from that album came out in February of 1984. We're going to talk about that as well. And another band that wouldn't be a megastar group before the end of the year, but within a couple of years, they would be absolutely huge in the United States. So that's just a teaser of things to come on Matt and Sheryl's Gen Excellent playlist.
It's a teaser for me, too, because I don't know which ones you're talking about.
That's right. Keep it Sheryl in the dark here, but we'll find out soon enough. And hopefully not too long before our next recording, we'll try and get back in the groove, Sheryl and I, after some delays here over the past few months.
Yeah.
But here's looking forward to the next time we get together on Matt and Sheryl's Gen Excellent playlist. I'm Matt.
I'm Sheryl.
Take care, everybody.